right, we'll go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for our webinar, Strategies for Overcoming Top SOC Challenges from 2022. Before we get into everything here, we'll go ahead and do some introductions. My name is Dan McKenzie. I am Senior Product Marketing Manager here at Torq. And I am joined by Ryan Darst, who is our Director of Security Automation. So with that, let's go ahead and get started.
So the data set for today's discussion is the 2022 SOC Survey from the organization SANS. This is a survey that they've been running for a couple of years now, and so they've got a good idea of what these broader trends are, but they do have some repeating questions each year, again, to find those trends. Broadly speaking, the goal of the report is pretty simple. It's just to get an idea of the SOC landscape. What are industry leaders thinking? What are your peers thinking? What are they doing? What are they concerned about? An example of some of the high-level topics that they explore. A very fundamental question: what makes a SOC? What is it that you need to be able to do to confidently say that you are a SOC? There is a list of about what they found. They asked people, and what they came back with, what the respondents said, was a consensus on about 22 different process-based, service-driven capabilities. And what that means is that it's 22 different tactics and activities, capabilities that a team has to do with an organization to be considered a SOC, by this group of peers. And that's everything from alert triage and incident response, all the way up to digital forensics with red team, blue team, purple teaming, whatever your organization happens to participate in, and up to, of course, larger strategy and planning. That list seems to grow, inch by inch. And I think, as we all know, a lot of those tasks or capabilities within there are getting more and more difficult. And so then, one of the natural questions that comes out of that is, how do you know, once you're doing these 22 capabilities or whatever it is, how do you know if you're doing it well, or are you bad at it? Could you improve? And there is a ongoing discussion, about what you should measure. Most of the respondents are measuring something, but there is not necessarily an agreement on what you should be measuring. And I think that's a good sign that shows that it's really dependent on what your goals are and what your organization goal is for you as a security team. I think one of the interesting pieces from that they pulled out was organizations looking at cost per record versus value per record. I don't think there's any wrong answer between the two, but it is the framing of you and your team and your capabilities. Is it about what you cost to the organization or the value you provide to the organization? What do you save them in avoided incidents? It's an interesting question, I think. But above and beyond sort of the more, philosophical almost questions about what is a SOC and what does it mean to be a good SOC, there's some much more fundamental challenges that they asked about. They each year ask professionals, what are you concerned about? What keeps you up at night? What are the things that you're struggling with? And this year's answers, at least across the top three, mirror what we see reported by a lot of other security teams, not just the SOC. And perhaps that's unsurprising. And those three challenges are perhaps familiar to you. High staffing requirements is number one. These organizations are reporting that they have between 2 and 10 people on average, but there is a significant turnover starting at the 3-year mark. And so it is not necessarily that there is a large team, perhaps there is at 10 people, but it is there's a lot of churn, and it's hard to keep at those numbers. And what's actually hard is the retention part, keeping those people from churning and turning over. They talk about offering career progression, personal education for these, perhaps junior team members. How do you grow them, their careers? If I have a junior analyst and she wants to become, a CISO someday, how do you set her on that right path to get there? Helping them do that. Bringing people in doesn't seem to be as hard. They can rehire, as it seems, but that brings in its own challenge. That introduces a lack of skills and knowledge when you're constantly onboarding people or trying to train them on internal processes. That can be a grind in and of itself. As I said earlier, there's that, up to those 22 capabilities to be, considered a quote-unquote SOC. And with that level of turnover, from high staffing requirements, many of these teams rely on specialized skills by outsourcing. And that adds to, again, that discussion of cost versus value. What are you actually spending to get these capabilities that, I'll put this in air quotes again, but what you should be able to do internally. And then the third challenge was more of a practical approach. Teams know that they need automation, and what they report is that they can't quite get there. There is, on the orchestration side, problems with partial deployment, of course, of all systems and security tools especially. Are you configured in the way that you need to be to get the data that your security team needs? Are you using all of the features and functionality to their greatest degree? And so figuring out if it's even deployed correctly can hamper that orchestration among systems and make sure that that piece of the train is operating correctly. And then automation in particular fails to deliver on the promise. Automation platforms in particular, we think these first-gen SOAR platforms that are they are powerful, but they are the lift to get them moving is equally difficult as they are powerful. And so what we want to take a look at today is how to alleviate all three of these with perhaps just some smarter tools. And we're going to take a look at some of this new generation of automation tools, these no-code automation tools, and seeing how this next generation of orchestration and automation systems can help alleviate these challenges to help people start looking forward and restructuring their priorities within the SOC to be able to be a little bit more proactive rather than reactive or suffering from some of these challenges. And so we'll take a look at each of these in turn, starting with if there's high staffing requirements. One of the key strategies is to simply add multipliers or to extend people's individual reach. And that involves reducing or eliminating these manual toil. And so using automation-enabled technologies like bots, pulling in information through APIs to perform a lot of this quote-unquote pre-work, like enriching threat alerts before you pass them on to the appropriate analyst or resource owner, using alert-based triggers rather than manual. So taking alerts from these frontline systems to trigger workflows at machine speed, giving your team an ability to act quicker and more consistently than they would be just manually. And then the other nice piece of some of these automation tools is the ability to integrate with these adjacent teams. The key on DevSecOps or whatever you want to call some of these new methodologies is the seamless integration with the adjacent processes, not an interruption. And so looking at ways to align the tools to reduce friction between teams while increasing visibility. And you do that by connecting things through these orchestration tools. Torq happens to be one such example, and so I'm going to pass this over to Ryan and have him show you an example of a workflow like this that can help extend your team's reach.
Thanks, Dan. I'm going to go over and highlight just a couple different templates that we do have available, kind of to show the breadth of what Torq can offer to your SOC team to help in your automation journey. We have a number of different things, and I pulled up, just search for Jump Cloud, for instance. And we have a couple interesting templates in here for doing things like unlocking a user's access. If they've locked their account, we can use something like Slack or a Microsoft Teams to help unlock that user by sending them a verification token via email. We can even do elevation of local admin privileges, so a user can do something like an sudo on a Mac. And again, triggering all of those things via Slack. And we can tie those into a ticketing system so that it's all tracked and audited and be a completely automated process for that. if you have other processes, like in this case, if I add MFA to my Okta account, maybe I want to get an alert or a verification that that was me that actually did that. Just like with your credit card, if you have some type of an alert set up when you spend a certain amount of money online, you'll get let's say a text message. This is no different. If somebody sets up MFA on a new MFA setup on their account and within Okta, if they say no, it wasn't me, then we can start a whole process of going out and getting the on-call person, opening an incident, making sure somebody takes over that ticket, and then closing the incident automatically when we have a result in that process. But the one I wanted to kind of highlight today is a workflow that we have for the use case here is we want to be able to track changes or we want to track a CVE that we receive, or the new CVE comes up, the next vulnerability we need to look for, and we need to go out and look in all of our systems for that CVE and figure out what our exposure is, how many devices are that we have that have that, and be able to track it as well, maybe over time to be able to do that. And this use case or this template does that. It will search in Wiz, Sneak, and Armis, those three in particular, for the CVEs, and will provide that and put it into a Jira ticket and also update it via Slack. So if I was to go in and kind of take a look at what I have here, I'll just go over the workflow real quickly, just kind of give you an idea of the possibilities. Is we receive this trigger in Slack called CVE search. At the end of that, we would have a CVE identifier. We would extract that message, and if we have the CVE that's included, we'll go ahead and grab it, and we're going to enrich that information, not just the CVE ID. We're going to go out to Recorded Future, grab the information from Recorded Future that has all the details of what the CVE is and any other information that they may provide. We could also, instead of going to Recorded Future, maybe we go straight to the NIST database, and we could grab that information there. And we also then will start kicking into some parallel executions to where we can go and execute these commands in parallel to go to each one of these sources. So again, I'm going to Sneak, I'm going to Wiz, I'm going to Armis, and I'm basically grabbing all the information from each one of those. I'm normalizing them and extracting which fields I want, and in this particular demo I'm using, I'm extracting just some general information. I've taken some out so I don't have account numbers and other identifiable information included. But again, being able to extract or pull all that information in to my results. And as I'm doing this, I'm putting all of these things into a result file. And if I have findings for each one of these, I am going to go in, I'm going to send a message back for each one of them to Slack, and I'm going to add those results to this findings array. And this is the key part of this whole workflow, is that we're putting this data into these arrays, and again, Sneak and Wiz. And what this findings array is doing for me, it gives me the ability that I can start going through and looking if a ticket is already opened or an issue is opened in Jira. So if I don't have a parent issue already open for the CVE, I'll go ahead and open one. If I don't have any findings, but I have a parent issue, that means that my environment's now clean of that particular CVE, and I can actually go through and actually close the issue. I'll put some comments in, close it, and send a status message via Slack. Now, if the parent issue exists, or if it was created, we're going to go through each one of those, and instead of creating an issue for every item that's in that list, what we're doing is we're going to create a child ticket that includes a file of the latest updates from the last run of what's vulnerable for the CVE. So if we don't have a child issue already created, we'll go ahead and create one over here. If there's a Jira child issue already created for this particular, let's say for Wiz for this CVE, we will actually go through and get the attachment that has all of those that inventory on it, and we'll compare it, and we'll put comments in to say it's the same, or something was added, something was deleted. So we constantly know what our exposure is whenever this workflow is actually executed. And I'll go through later in this demonstration too to show how we can even extend this even further as an automation piece, and I'll save that for in just a little bit. But let's actually see what this looks like when we run it. See if I still have my CVE search here. So I'm going to execute this search, and what we'll see is we'll get all of our replies back into a thread here from the workflow. And if I open this thread, we can see that we're starting our data collection against RMS and Sneak and Wiz for this CVE that we're looking for. And the data I'm going to get returned, it'll come back into, in this example, I'm bringing it back to Slack. So I have three examples of in Wiz that's included with this. And I also have a Jira ticket that was created. So I have SOC 367 that was created for this issue. So now if I go back up to my SOC board, we can see that this SOC 367 was just created. I have my details that were included from Recorded Future that I've placed into this issue. We have our child issue now that's included. And now we can see that I have my attachment, and if I open the attachment, it has that same detail of JSON that I had in my Slack message. Now, let's take this one step further, and what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to delete this attachment. And the reason for that is I've actually made some changes into that attachment that I want to just kind of highlight. I've actually changed one of the machines, so this kind of shows that this machine, when the next run happens, that this one should be clean. And then when I run, and then this one should be existing, and I'll have another one that gets added. And we'll see what the Jira comments look like when we do this. So let's go ahead and execute this this workflow one more time. I'll do this from the search here. Again, same workflow executing. We'll look in our thread, it's starting the collection against all three of our sources. And then once it gets the results, again, the Wiz results aren't going to change because they're the same. I changed that file that was located within Jira. So it's going to do the comparison in the SOC ticket against that. So now we have our comparison, or our Wiz results, again, those same three results we had before. And we now see that the Jira issue, it exists, and basically we can go to our ticket here. So again, 367, we'll go back into the Wiz findings. And now you can see that we have new comments here. These were devices that were added. These were ones that were not in my attachment. And these were removed. This was the test machine I put into that attachment. So we can actually see and we can track over time, what was added, what was removed from the list. And my attachment now includes what is actually in Wiz for today for that response. Again, think of the use case of an analyst or a user having to go to all these different systems, pull a report, extract the data out, attach it into some system. We're taking a lot of that heavy lifting out of the way and being able to do this on an automated fashion. And again, this is being triggered by Slack on kind of an ad hoc method. And we'll talk later in the session today on how we can improve this and make this more of an automated system to be able to do this all automatically. All right, I'm going to kick it back over to Dan for our next section.
Yeah, excellent examples, Ryan. The next challenge that we're going to look at is this result of high turnover, which is this lack of skills or loss of knowledge internally. I think one of the smartest strategies that a team can adopt is to, build mechanisms to share that knowledge back. So rather than losing it when you have that turnover, how can you build it internally and share it? I've always liked this quote. Google Scholar uses this as their sort of tagline, but it's standing on the shoulders of giants and recognizing that to be able to achieve great things or to be a good SOC. It's not to reinvent knowledge every single time, but to stand, in front or on top of those who came before you. Pretty easy. And some of the ways that you can use tools to do that is enabling your senior staff to distribute their knowledge. In some of the more specific ways you can do that in these new orchestration and automation tools like Torq is to build the little blocks and pieces that staff can kind of piece together as needed, almost like, I don't know if we'll run into a trademark, building blocks, kids building blocks, we'll say plastic building blocks, if you know what I mean. And giving your teams these pieces that they can then build together. So taking individual steps or individual processes within a larger, let's say like incident response workflow. What are some of the individual sub workflows within that or individual steps? Can you package that together and give that as a package to your more junior staff or to save in some sort of repository? To that point, if you don't have that senior staff, copy what the experts say. Kind of that same thing is taking the frameworks and benchmarks from organizations like MITRE or CIS and templatizing those activities, similar to the way you might set up policies within your other security systems, is to templatize those into activities and steps. And again, for both of these, I think the underlying requirement is that you let the tools do that work for you. So creating these repositories of mini automations or even up to full workflows, templates of these full workflows for common tasks that allow you to save rework. And as I said, from that first point, is to take those individual building blocks and develop more compound automations. And so if you can find ways to package the work that is needed sort of in these almost like little atomized packages that then you can build together later, that helps add that the ability to stand on the shoulders of giants. And so I'm going to pass it back over to Ryan here and have him show the ways that you can use an orchestration and automation tool like Torq to package up these sort of atomized pieces of a workflow.
All right, thanks, Dan. We're going to go ahead and talk about these smaller pieces or smaller workflows and nested workflows and how those would relate and how we can make things easier. First, I'm going to build a really simple workflow, and I'm going to start with a kind of an empty workflow here. I'm going to add a new parameter, and I'm going to call this domain. So the heart of what I'm going to do here is I'm going to pull a virus total step, and I'm going to pull in the domain that I'm going to use here. So I'm going to grab the domain information from virus total, and when I run this, I'm just going to put apple.com, for instance, and go grab the domain information from virus total. So now I have my result, and let's say I want to get one piece of information out of here called the last analysis statistics. And if it's malicious or suspicious, I want to do one thing. If not, I'll do another. And I'm going to set a variable. Again, these are, you could do all kinds of interesting things here. I'll say malicious or suspicious. And I'm going to start grabbing the details from the get domain information. Last analysis statistics, malicious if it's greater than equal 1, and I'm going to do an OR as well, so we can do grab all this information from virus total, and in this one we'll do suspicious, and again greater than equal 1. It'll come down this way here, so we're going to say result. I'll give it a name data. I'm going to pass through some JSON data here. So again, I'm going to call this our result. And here I will say malicious or suspicious. Now, I'm going to go ahead and copy that step. I'm going to rename it to be the same. because we want this result to be the same no matter which path it comes down. It'll be one or the other. And we'll say clean if there's no results here. So let's run this one more time, and we can see apple.com. We'll execute it, and we'll see a result should come back clean because it was not seen as malicious or suspicious. Now, what I'm going to do is, this is a very, very simple, it's about as simple as it gets with logic. I have a step and an if operation. This could be a larger workflow or a portion of a workflow that you want to collapse. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically select the steps that I want to build into a new workflow. And I can actually click this button here called Create Workflow. And I'm going to say this is a VT domain test. I'll create it. And now all of those steps that I had are executed within this nested workflow that I've just created. You can see I'm passing through the event domain. Now when I run this, I'm not going to get any result because I didn't set in the nested workflow what my output needs to be. So I'll go back and set that real quickly, and I'll show you how easy this is. And again, this could have been a step that was executing, sending Slack messages, opening tickets, doing something that we didn't need a return result. But in this case, I want to see the return result from that. So I can literally just click the open workflow. You can see all my logic that was being added. And let's go back and let's just say, we'll build a little JSON here and say output. And we're going to put the result. And whatever the result was here, and I'll put this in quotes since that is a string. And I'll publish this. So now that I've published this workflow, when I execute this workflow again, let's go ahead and run it. Should see the output come back. It's executed. And we should see our result now is clean. So again, very simple example of taking a piece of logic, putting it into our workflow, and executing it. So again, this could have been a larger component looking in multiple places, maybe sending a Slack message, opening a ticket in ServiceNow. It could have been any number of pieces of information. But we can take those steps and collapse them into a simple nested workflow. And then we can use that nested workflow in any other workflow that we have now that we have that logic built. So let's take a look at something else that we have available where we have, let's say, a Slack message and a Teams message. Let's say, and this is a common occurrence we have is some customers are using both Slack and Teams. So maybe we want to send preferably to Slack first if we find the user there. If we don't, we look for them in Azure to send them over to the other side. And this is a template that's in the template library you can pull off the shelf and use. And for instance, let's go ahead and just run this. So the name of this nested workflow is August 25th. Send message over Slack or Teams. So what I can very easily do is pull this up here, and we'll say this is send a message. And we'll do the August 25th, send a message over Slack and Teams. I'm going to go ahead and use my test email. And I'm going to say this is a test to send this message. So let's go ahead and execute it. And what this is doing is it's calling that nested workflow with all of this logic included, and it's going to look for the user in Slack and send everything over. So let's go back here. We can see that we saw the return, we saw the recipient and the message timestamp for the thread. And we can see this as a test was just sent. So now let's take this one step a little bit further here. And so we have this template that we pulled in. And let's say we want to flip this. Like this is going to send by default we're going to look in Slack first, and if they're found in Slack, we want to send it via Slack. But let's say we want to do the opposite. We want Teams first. So, how difficult is that to make that change? And let me do it real quickly here, and let's give it a test. I'm going to go ahead and edit my workflow. I'm going to go ahead and just drag these things in the order I want. So I'm going to look for the user in Azure Active Directory, and if they're found in Azure Active Directory, we'll post the message. If they're not in Azure Active Directory, we'll search the users here, and if they're found in Slack, we'll send the message. And then if they're not found in Slack, we'll send a message back saying the user wasn't found. But again, if either one of these, we'll send the results of the sending of the message wherever it ended up needing to go. So again, I just kind of flipped this workflow on its head, where before it was sending to Slack first. Now we want to send to Microsoft Teams. So let me just go ahead and publish this. And remember, I didn't change anything in my demonstration workflow where I'm sending a message. This was sending to Slack. So let's go ahead and execute it one more time after I've made this publish to my other change, and see if I get my message in Teams now. So I don't have a message here in Slack. Let's go take a look in Teams, and now we can see I just sent the message to Microsoft Teams by changing this nested workflow in the order that it was being used. A very simple example of using the nested workflows and the logic that we've already built into the templates to be able to modify and change these and take the logic that you have or that you may need in multiple workflows and use them to your advantage, so that you can take that logic and build multiple workflows or processes that you need to facilitate your automation. Again, I'll kick it back to Dan for our next section of our webinar.
The last piece that we will look at is barriers to automation. Organizations know they should be doing it. They want to do it, but there's, for whatever reason, barriers in the way they get to that. And I think probably the smartest way to get past that challenge is to adopt this no-code approach. One of the biggest challenges, or those biggest obstacles to automation, is finding staff when you're already challenged for skills and to keep your headcount, but adding staff and dedicated development skills to be able to run these sort of first generation automation platforms that take quite a bit of upfront investment and coding and or scripting skills to be able to use them appropriately. No-code platforms sort of bypass this by abstracting those little snippets of scripting or of code or of API calls or of actions being taken across tools. And a no-code platform like Torq can abstract that into those, as we were talking earlier, those little atomized pieces that you can then build out your workflows from there. And so it's not that there is no code there whatsoever, or that you can't see the code or can't control it yourself, but you're kind of waving a magic wand over it almost, and giving your team the ability to, rather than focusing on the underlying code to make that happen, you just give them the building block of that happening, and you let them piece those together. One of the most important parts to making that work, though, is the need for open integrations. When you're looking for no-code platforms, looking at the ones that offer no barriers, no additional work for those integrations with the adjacent tools, whether that's your cloud service provider or something within your development pipeline or communications and project management tools. There's a lot of systems that need to be orchestrated. And so these no-code platforms built on cloud-native architectures are built to be extensible. They support wide-ranging automations and orchestrations across your entire tool stack without the need for additional integration development or packs or anything like that. Basically running through a series of API calls the ability to orchestrate becomes much easier. And then lastly, this is sort of an extension of the challenge before, but standing on the shoulders of giants. Make sure that when you're assessing some of these no-code tools, that they offer a deep security-specific library of templates. We said earlier that internal knowledge is a challenge. You can find the tools that help you develop those atomized pieces to be able to sort of build these workflows, or even you can build and share the workflows themselves. But an even faster path to return on investment once you have deployed the system is finding tools that have those built out for you already. And you can either use those out of the box as they go, with, as is the case with Torq, or as starting points for customization. So Ryan is going to show you kind of how this comes to life in Torq.
All right, for our last section, I want to go over how we could extend this workflow we talked about in our first section. And in this particular case, we're looking for the Wiz, Sneak, and RMS CVE findings. And let's say we want to extend this to add another source. In this case, I'm going to pick Orca, because it's another source that we have for CVE. So if I search my templates for CVE, we can see that there's a template here already built, and it's a basic template to create CVEs. So we have some logic already here of very similar, getting a CVE from Slack and going through, we get our session, we grab our CVE details, and we extract, in this case, all the asset names. So we already have most of the logic we need to create the to add this to our other workflow. So again, as Dan suggested before, looking at things that exist already within, in this case, the Torq templates, gives you a shortcut into extending a template you may want to build or use. So if I go in and let's just start adding it. I'm going to show how easy it is in the extensibility of the platform itself. There's a few places I need to kind of add some options. I'm going to so I have added Orca here as a source, so I'll have that set to true, and I'll go down, and we have our three options here right now: the Sneak, Wiz, and RMS. And I have another workflow that I'm going to pull from. Again, I tested this as part of grabbing those steps from the other template. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and edit this workflow, and I'm going to paste in the steps from my other workflow itself. Again, simple as a copy and paste that you would do in any other document. So I'm going to go ahead and add Orca here. So now we see, now I have some Orca steps that have been added. So this will go get all my CVE details for Orca, or extract the details from the results there. And I need to add one more section. Remember, we have a section here to send a message via Slack and to add to our findings array. So I went ahead and I've pre-populated this as well. So let me just copy this in, and I'm going to paste it right into our findings here, or into the workflow. So now I will have all of my findings for Orca will be added to my findings array if there's anything found. And again, this extends this workflow to a whole nother source of CVEs, and the ability for it to open issues within Jira, just like we shown in that first section. So let me go ahead and I'm going to publish this workflow. Say we added Orca. And now that the workflow is published, the next time it runs, I will have Orca as a source for those CVEs. So let's go ahead and execute this again to see how what this looks like now that we've added this new source. Again, it took maybe 4 or 5 minutes to add that in, And now we can see we have our, our fourth source now is of Orca being searched as well for that data. And once we see the results here, we should see a new child ticket opened within Orca. So we have one finding. This is searching different sources of data. And again, our SOC 367 already existed. So let's go take a look at our SOC tickets. So go back to 367. And we see now we have this Orca finding that was not here earlier. And this was just added. And again, just like before, we're attaching the details of that. So again, you can kind of see how easy it is to extend a workflow to add functionality very quickly into the Torq platform. And again, this was a matter of minutes of adding another source. Now let's say we wanted to further extend our usability in this workflow. And currently, right now, this is being triggered via Slack. I can change this trigger very easily to be an on-demand trigger, so that I'll receive a CVE from a nested workflow, like I shown in the last section, that we can have a nested workflow. This workflow itself could exist as a nested workflow that just runs when it sees a CVE. So instead of just being an ad hoc analyst tool to kind of search and get an inventory, what if we could make it one step better? And again, if I go back to my templates, I'm going to look for I have a NIST template that goes out and finds the latest CVEs. And so think about taking the next step of this, scheduling this NIST workflow to run, let's say once a day. And now what I can do is I could go in, and if a CVE has not been handled, or if it's a new CVE that we see, I could actually execute that nested workflow and send over the CVE I'm receiving from NIST into that workflow I've just shown that's going out to Wiz, Sneak, Orca, and Armis, and be able to automatically search those sources automatically when a new CVE is created. And then you can go even further and say that if it's a CVE that's 60 days old, 90 days old, continue to search every day, get an update, put it into Jira, put it in whatever system you may want to do. This gives us that ability to be able to do that. And again, then running the nested workflows, being able to execute your own little smaller blocks of logic to get things out, really extends the ability to use the platform, use the templates and the examples we have in here to extend the workflows and the automation that your team can build and implement very quickly. All right, I'm going to send it back over to Dan to wrap things up. And Dan, on to you.
Thanks, Ryan. So again, just to recap for everyone, looking at some of the smartest ways and sustainable approaches for SOC teams to overcome a lot of these top challenges. You got to look for ways to increase your team members' individual reach. How do you let one person do the work of 3 people sustainably? And you've got to look for ways to consolidate and package that work into more manageable pieces. You've got to use those as mechanisms to share knowledge. So even if you may have high turnover or a lot of junior staff that are, you're working to train up, finding ways to package all of your knowledge together into functional pieces that they can then deploy and operationalize helps them use the knowledge without necessarily needing to reinvent the wheel of learning that knowledge entirely, or rebuilding it, I should say. And then lastly, all of that depends on whether or not you can build out, these automations and these repositories. And I would say I think that the best way to do that is the no-code approach. It is no secret that automation is going to be required to be able to maintain pace with those 22 and counting capabilities. And so there's no way that you're going to be able to keep up with that without figuring out a way to have non-coders build things that are ultimately interacting with code. And that no-code approach is, I think, when you abstract that into usable, atomized pieces that they can then operationalize, again, that just makes everything much easier, and you can start worrying about how to do the work rather than figuring out how to configure your tools to help you do that work. Okay, great. We're going to wrap up here. We'll get a couple of questions, so we'll move into Q&A. And Ryan, I think I saw you answering some in the chat, so I will go ahead and hand it over to you, and we can ask that first one that came through.
Okay, so the first question that I saw here is, can I send the details of the CVE findings to a Teams channel that has file storage? And we do have a template that shows how to do exactly that, including using deep links, so you can actually open links to that. If you send a Teams message, open that file within Teams itself and not have to open another window. The second question here is, do you support the Hive for creating and updating cases? Answer is yes, we have steps for the Hive along with ServiceNow and Jira. And those are the questions I had here, Dan.
Great. And I don't think I saw any others come through. So thanks, Ryan, and thank you to everyone for joining us today. We will be sending up some follow-ups by email with the recording of the deck. But if you would like to see how our no-code platform can help you transform your security team, please, by all means, head over onto torq.io and click Get Started up in the top corner, and we can get you a demo. Thanks, everyone.